Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
My title today is Everybody's Got One. We're going to jump right in by talking about cavemen. Don't look at your spouse. If you've ever heard the allegory of Plato's cave, Plato's cave is this story that's in the Republic, in that writing, and it's a story that is told about a conversation between Glaucon and which is Plato's brother, and Socrates. And in this dialogue, in this conversation, they describe a scenario in which a group of people have been chained up their entire life inside of a cave. It's totally dark inside of the cave. They've been chained up in such a way that they can't look behind them and they can't look to the side. They can only face forward, and what they see in front of them is a massive wall inside of the cave. What they don't know is behind them is a walkway that leads from outside of the cave on one side, through the cave, and out the other, and there is a fire that is kept lit on the backside of the walkway. As people are making their way through the cave, they're carrying objects, and those objects cast shadows on the wall in front of the prisoners. Their whole life, all of their memories, and all of their experiences have been in the cave. Therefore, what they see on the walls, we would call shadows, they call reality. It's all they've ever known, and they begin to fabricate stories about what's happening and about what the world must be like based on the only thing they can see. As the story progresses, one of the individuals breaks free one day. And when he breaks free, he stands up and looks around behind him, and what he sees behind him blinds him in an instant. We would call it a fire. He doesn't know what it is yet. He just knows the light is blinding compared to the darkness that he's been looking at for so long. As his eyes adjust, he begins to see the fire. He sees the people crossing back and forth over the walkway. He sees the objects they're carrying. He begins to connect the dots and recognizes that the only thing we would call those on the wall are shadows. They're not the real thing itself. Eventually, he makes his way out of the cave and out into the natural light, which is blinding as well. But once his eyes adjust there, he begins to make observations about the world. And the conclusion is this: that source of light in the sky, that big round ball, that is the source of all life here on earth. Things grow when that thing shines, and it is the thing that causes everything to exist. And so he returns to the cave, excited to tell all of his fellow prisoners the truth, the reality of things. And as he begins to explain them, they have no framework to comprehend what he is saying. They simply believe he must be crazy. The word that's used to describe what he is telling them is the word logos. Logos means the logic, the rationality, the reason for everything that we see. Eventually, in the story, because all old stories are morbid, they kill him because of his lunacy. Now, Plato is using this to describe. He describes this as the role of the philosopher, the naturalist in the world. Their job is to observe things, to think deeply on things, to search diligently, and then report accurately about the nature of things, to explain the logic, the reason, the rationality to everyone else. It's interesting when you frame John chapter 1 inside of this context, because it is inside of this context, with the philosophers and the naturalists that are emerging, the scientists that are coming up in their world. And listen to what John says about what makes sense of everything. In fact, John is going to use a really specific word. I don't like the way it's translated in most Bibles. It's just translated as the Word, but it is literally logos. It's a philosophical term of the day. John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Listen to this. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through Him, and nothing was created except through Him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and His life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it or cannot comprehend it. He's absolutely borrowing from the language of the day, and what he's saying is this: you want to know what makes sense of everything that you see around you? I'm telling you, Jesus is the reason. He is the thing that makes sense of everything. Now, you can believe it or not, but what John is clearly declaring is that if you want to understand how our world came into existence, Jesus. If you want to understand how we're to function and live and be with one another, Jesus. He's saying very clearly, whether you agree or disagree, that Jesus is the thing that makes sense of everything. Jesus is the starting point for understanding the world that we live in. Which brings me to epistemology. And other than the fact that it's just a really fun word to say, go ahead, you try it. Epistemology. I say it 10 times. No, don't. When your kids say it, you think they're swearing. Epistemology is simply the study of knowledge. That'd be an interesting field, huh? Like, how do you know something? How do we come to conclusions about what is true and what is not true? How do we develop an understanding or a knowledge? And how do we know if the things that we come to are accurate descriptions of the world that we live in? Now, probably our generation, more so than almost any other generation, is living in a world of information overload. Anybody? Like, it's coming at such a rapid pace in our day. In fact, when I come out here, I have to put my watch on Do Not Disturb, and then I forget for like a week that that's on, and I miss all my text messages, which is awesome. But I put my phone Do Not Disturb because I'm going to get information coming to me through my watch, through my phone, through my computer. Like, we take in so much data. Now, most of it you don't even really give a whole lot of thought to, but you're actually making decisions about whether you believe what you hear or not subconsciously. In fact, if you were to think about it for a moment, you just see coming across Facebook, Church on the Rock is the best church in the valley. Now, we all know that's true, and so you don't really... Just kidding. So you don't really think about some of the things that come your way a lot because you already agree with them. But in epistemology, the study of knowledge, there's only 3 positions that you could take with any bit of information that comes your way. Whatever it is, whether it's political stuff or scientific stuff or religious stuff, you can affirm, you can say, I agree with what I just heard or what I just saw or what I just read. I agree, I affirm it. You can deny it, and denying it would be to reject it. I don't believe that thing is true, and you're doing this consciously and subconsciously all the time. In fact, you're doing it right now as we're in this room together. Or you can withhold. You can abstain, right? You can say, I'm not going to create an opinion or a thought about that. Now, when we're talking about morality, right and wrong, does it exist in the world? If you were to affirm that morality exists in the world, you don't actually have to believe in a God to believe in morality or right and wrong. If you agree or affirm it, you would be a moralist. And in religious terms, in reference to a God, you would actually be a theist. You would believe there is a God. If you were to reject that or deny it, if you were to say, no, I don't believe that's true, you would be an amoralist. In other words, there is no absolutes when it comes to morality. Might makes right. There's no right and wrong. Or, in religious terms, the existence of a God, you would be an atheist. There is no God. And the third position, I'm going to withhold or abstain from making a decision right now, is called agnostic. It simply means that either I don't have enough data to make a decision, or I don't believe that the truth is actually knowable. So when you hear someone say they're agnostic for one of two primary reasons. They either believe that truth is unknowable, you can never know for certain, or they're saying, I don't have enough information yet to make a decision. Now, when you're talking about what are called exclusive truth claims, in other words, the claims that exclusive truth claims are this, they exclude competing or counter claims. In other words, they're stated in such a way that two things cannot both be true. And the reality is, if you affirm one position, you are by default denying its counterclaim. I'll give you an example. I'm going to make a statement. You can decide if it's true or not. There is only one chair in this room. True or false? Some of you are like, I know he's trying to trick me. I'm not. I'm throwing you a softball. This is an easy one. It's obvious. The counterclaim is this: there are multiple chairs in this room. There cannot be multiple chairs in this room and only one chair in this room, right? And there cannot be only one chair in this room, and by affirming one, you're by default denying the other. But let's get it a little bit more difficult. Some of the chairs in this room have holes in them, much to Pastor Wampa's dismay. Some of the chairs have holes in them. Here's the other. None of the chairs in this room have holes in them. That's a little bit more tricky, but we could figure it out pretty quickly. If you're sitting in a chair with a hole in it, just raise your hand really high. Yeah, I see that hand. I see that finger pointing. Somebody just got accused of sitting in a chair with a hole in it. Yeah, I mean, you could find out, but let's just pretend for a moment that every single Sunday when you showed up at church, the chair that you sat in had a hole in it. In fact, no matter where you moved in the room, the chair that you sat in had a hole in it. And over time, your experience would tell you that all the chairs in the room must have holes in them. But the reality is that some of the chairs in the room have holes in them. Here's the thing. Our experiences in life begin to shape the way we see the world around us. You're told that there are two perspectives that people choose to live from. One is sort of couched in the terms of logic. It's science, it's reason, it's empirical evidence, it's provable and repeatable. And then there is the other group of people, which is probably most of you, and you're the faith people. You're the ones who, even though it may be illogical, you still believe, you exercise faith, and it's rooted in your upbringing and irrational belief and longing for meaning. But some people just need that crutch. And yet the reality is this: both groups of people exercise faith. We call these things starting assumptions if you're in the scientific community. But the reality is everyone has starting assumptions. They're things that you come to the table with. In fact, if you're in the scientific community, maybe your starting assumption is that there is no God and everything can be proven without the existence of a God. And so you begin to look at everything in the world through that filter. Okay, here's the thing. When it comes to science, it must be observable, repeatable, and verifiable. And when we're talking about the creation of the world, we're all in the same boat. The question becomes, Do my starting assumptions actually make sense with the world that I find myself in? Which brings me to everybody's got one. Starting assumptions are kind of like belly buttons. Everybody's got one. We all have ways that we see the world, lenses or filters that we look through, expectations that are created. I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but you went to eat something that you thought was one thing, and it was actually another, and it was the most bizarre feeling. Anyone ever, you've done it? When, kids, you can plug your ears for a moment. When I used to work at a camp in Michigan, nobody's plugging your ears. When I worked at a camp in Michigan, for newcomers who were joining our team, the rec team at the camp, we had an initiation process. Some might call it hazing, but that's illegal. At an initiation process, we would take a pie crust, a graham cracker pie crust. You would melt butter, pour the butter into the pie crust, and then let it cool, and then serve it with a little bit of whipped cream on top and tell them it was cheesecake. Here's what's amazing. They would eat the entire piece of cheesecake and ask for another because their expectation was that it was cheesecake. And then you didn't see them for about a day and a half because they were in the bathroom the whole time. Often our expectations create our perceived realities. And as the song says, you don't always get what you want. But the truth of the matter is, you often get exactly what you're already looking for. A worldview is defined in this way by James Sire in The Universe Next Door. A worldview is a set of presuppositions, assumptions which may be true, partially true, or entirely false, which we hold consciously or subconsciously, consistently or inconsistently, about the basic makeup of our world. It's a filter through which you view the world. And these are formed in a number of different ways, but they're ultimately rooted in a series of questions. I've broken it down into 4 questions that we all end up asking at some point in life. The first question is this: where did I come from? The second question is, why am I here on earth? The third question is, where am I going when it's all over? And the last one is this: what is true? How can I know truth? Can I know truth? And we make certain assumptions about the answers to these questions. The first one early in life is that I can trust my caregivers, right? The people who are raising me, either the people who brought me into this world or the people who are helping me survive in this world at an early age. I can trust my caregivers. Surely they're the ones who would tell me the truth. And at some point in life, usually around 12 or 13, long before our frontal lobe is fully developed, but our hormones begin to kick in, we begin to make new assumptions about who we can trust. Maybe it isn't just my caregivers. I need to broaden my circle out to my community. Surely this group of people, whether it's peers and friends or whether it's educators, surely this group of people would tell me the truth about what the world is really like. And from there we move on to our culture. We look around at the world around us, and surely this many people can't be wrong about these things. And we have arguments, probably the way that you would have arguments, right? When we want to tell someone, honey, I need to buy a new Polaris Ranger. Everybody who is getting moose bought a new Polaris Ranger. Therefore, the only way to get moose, right? Like, we build these arguments and we sort of draw in everybody language. And this is what happens culturally as well. Everybody who's reasonable, everybody who's logical, every scientist, am I right, Joe Simpkins, believes these things. And I'm just telling you, it's not true. But it's culture, and it's sort of forced on you at every possible turn. But at some point in life, you and I need to begin making honest assessment about the answers to those questions. Can I tell you a secret? God isn't afraid of your questions. I know you think they're brilliant questions. I know you think they're really, really good, and you're going to trip him up. Or he's going to be really mad at you if you ask them. I'm just telling you, God is not in heaven, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, saying, I hope this generation doesn't ask this question. We still don't have an answer for it. Right? Like, let's get a think tank together. Let's do some polling. What answer works the best? Like, God is not afraid. Listen to this. God is not afraid of an honest pursuit of truth. When that pursuit is tainted and bent and already headed in a direction, that's a different matter. But he is never afraid of an honest pursuit of truth. He delights in revealing himself to you. He's not offended when you ask hard questions. He's not offended when you doubt. What he wants is the opportunity to reveal himself to you. But assessment at some point becomes really important, and you have to ask the question, are my sources reliable? And are my assumptions correct? Because we all have starting assumptions, things we begin the journey with. Are my assumptions correct? Are my views congruent? In other words, are they logical? Do they flow from one to the next to the next? I'll just give you an example. I've given it to you before, but Christians have a different starting assumption than atheists do. In fact, if you're coming from an atheistic scientific perspective, your starting assumption is that there is no God, which creates a real problem when it comes to the creation of the world. The scientific principle in layman's terms, everything comes from something. Everything has a beginning. Everything has a starting point. And so it doesn't matter how far back you push it. Let's push it all the way back to two particles floating through space, wherever that came from. And those particles collide, and that collision is so atomic, so massive in its explosive nature that the universe blows into existence. And from that, over billions and billions of years, we eventually have life emerge out of the primordial soup. Some of us are still emerging out of the primordial soup, and life emerges from there. And all of that aside, whatever, let's just leave all of that alone. Let's just take this approach. Where did the particles come from if everything comes from something? And here's what's happening in our day currently. They're redefining what something is. Well, they came from a black hole, and a black hole is nothing. Well, wait a minute. Where did the black hole come from? You keep asking this question. You get the idea, right? You just keep asking this question back. It's called an infinite regress because there isn't an ultimate answer to the question, because the starting assumption is that there is no God, and the scientific principle is that everything comes from something. Listen, that's not the Christian starting assumption. The Christian starting assumption is that there is one thing that came from nothing. It has always existed. It is eternal. And however confusing the term eternal is to you and I, however illogical it may seem to you, what's true is it is at least logical to start with one thing that came from nothing. It is eternal and always has existed. We call it God. And from there, everything came. That's John's declaration. Here's the question you have to ask. Are my assumptions congruent? Do they make sense if I chase them all the way back? And I'm just telling you, however fantastical it sounds, the Christian starting assumption at least makes sense with the world that we find ourselves in. And the last one is there evidence to the contrary? Don't be afraid to search it out. How many of you have seen The Life of Pi? Nice. How many of you have seen VeggieTales? I was just curious if it was the same group. Everything seems like it's further and further away than I thought it was. It's a great film. Basically, a young boy named Pi growing up in India. His parents own a zoo, and his parents decide for who knows what reason, Dale, to take the entire zoo to Canada. But they get the zoo on the boat, and they head off for Canada. And en route, there's a storm, and there's a fire, and the boat begins to sink. And in the midst of the boat sinking, there is one life raft available, one boat available. And this young boy ends up in the boat. Listen to this. He ends up in the boat with a hyena, a zebra, an orangutan, and a Bengal tiger. That sounds like a good time on the water. And the story is about the journey all the way to rescue on the boat with these animals. And there are some horrific events along the way, but it ends up by the end of the story, as you can imagine, it's only the boy and the tiger left on the boat. They hit shore, the tiger jumps off, they look longingly at each other. The tiger runs off into the jungle, and the boy is found and rescued. A group of Chinese insurance agents show up, and they want to know what the story is because they need to know if they need to pay any money out. Now, of course, if you know anything about insurance, they never want to pay any money out. But the boy begins to tell the story about what took place on the life raft. And he tells the story about the orangutan and the zebra and the Bengal tiger and the hyena. And he tells the whole story, and he gets to the end of it, and the insurance guys look at him, and they're like, woohoo, why don't you tell us the real story? Because that story doesn't make any sense to us. And so he proceeds to tell another story. And in this story, each one of the animals are representing an actual person who was on the boat with him. And the events that happen with real people instead of animals are so traumatic that their conclusion is the boy made up the other story to not deal with the trauma of what really happened on the boat. And the insurance guys are happy and they carry on. And then the story picks up that he's being interviewed. This young boy is now an old man, and there's a guy writing an article about the story, and he gets all the way to this point, and he asks Pi this: which story is the true story? And the response is this: well, which is the better story to you? And this is actually what is written up about the purpose of the film. And I want you to catch how nuanced this is. This is from the director. If fiction is an escape hatch or a gentler version of the truth, then religion is a lifeboat that keeps us afloat in the face of our own mortality. Both fiction and religion perform a similar function. They take the simple biological imperatives: we are born, we live, we die, and color them with narrative in an effort to make them more palatable, more personal, more digestible. All religions provide believers with a creation story, rituals for daily life, and stories that illustrate in an indirect way the nature of human life. The implied truth is that the reality or the truthfulness of our religious constructs are secondary and inconsequential to the meaningfulness they provide for us. What you're being told is it's irrelevant if it's true, as long as it feels right. Is it irrelevant if it's true? Because I don't know about you, but if it's not true, I got other things I can be doing with my life. Like I could be out for the whole moose season instead of up here today, I can tell you that much. And my odds might increase dramatically. They might not. I mean, there's lots of things we could be doing besides gathering in this place today. If it's just a story, if it's just fantasy, it matters to me. It's worth the work to discover it. We live in a world that wants you to believe something that they simply cannot prove any more than you and I can. They want you to believe that there is no God. At worst yet, they want you to believe, this is humanism, that you and I are our own God. We are the measure of morality. We are the measure of meaningfulness. We are the measure of all things right and wrong. Those are just constructs of society. They didn't come from a sovereign God. Therefore, they can change whenever we'd like. They begin the journey of discovery with blinders already on, eliminating the possibility with their starting assumption from the very beginning. And Romans chapter 1 describes what that kind of world looks like when it is fully realized, because this isn't new to you. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. But God, shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. I want to pause there just for a moment, and I want you to understand something. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, it appears as though the watch, right, has been made by a designer, and this is an argument that's been used for a long time, that when you look at the created world, there are similarities and patterns. It seems obvious to the scientist that there are things that are repeated over and over, that there must be a designer when we actually discover how much detail is necessary for you to be in this room right now, breathing air and thinking. And this is what Richard Dawkins says in his book, The Blind Watchmaker. He says, although the world appears to have been designed from the scientific perspective, although the world appears to have been designed, you must banish that thought from your mind if you are to understand science and reason. Okay, wait a minute. Like, our starting place is, it seems to make the most sense by what I can observe around me, that there is a designer. That designer must be infinitely intelligent and powerful to have created this world and to understand how it functions. That seems like, to almost every reasonable person, Romans 1 is declaring, God, through creation itself, has made his invisible attributes known, his eternal power and his glory. But if you really want to understand the world, don't look at the obvious. Your starting assumption should be there is no God, and then you can understand the world around you. That is foolishness by God's description. Okay, let's go on with the passage, because I could preach all day right here. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. God created man in his image, and ever since, man has returned to the favor. Get it on the way home. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshiped idols made to look like mere people and football players and singers and politicians and birds and animals and reptiles. None of the rest of that was in there. So God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. And as a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies, because man became the measure of his own morality. They traded the truth about God for a lie, so they worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. Can I get a witness? Oh, wait. Amen. The truth is, we all have filters that we see the world through. In fact, inadvertently, I probably created one of these for one of my daughters. Last summer, we did 3 family reunions and a high school reunion. You want to talk about a good time in 3 weeks. That was not it. But while we were in Memphis, my hometown, the place where I was born, where we were in Memphis, I had the opportunity to take my daughter out on a daddy-daughter date. And for the very first time, she got to try Krispy Kreme donuts. In fact, I have a couple of pictures of how good of a time. We wore the hats and everything. Like, we did it right. Now, what I've discovered, and look at her face. I mean, like, here's the reality. She is convinced at this moment Krispy Kreme donuts are the best donuts in the world. They're not. They just have crack cocaine in them. In fact, this morning we had some on our counter. My wife did it to me. We had some on our counter, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to eat one of these before I run off to the church. 12 donuts later. I'm just, I might get in trouble for this. I think Krispy Kreme may sue me. But I'm just telling you, Donut King is way better than Krispy Kreme donuts. They just are. Now, they don't have as many drugs in them, but they're way better. But I may never convince my daughter of that. You know why? Because it's all wrapped up in an experience that we had together that shapes the way she views the donut world. Right? Krispy Kreme will always hold a dear place in her heart. We all have these kinds of things that shape the way that we see the world. My counselor, yes, I said it out loud. I have a counselor. Get over it. It's your fault. My counselor calls them distorted perspectives. They're ways that we see things, ways that we think about ourselves, ways that we think about others that are actually distorted. And those distortions come from a layer just below them that are called unprocessed wounds. They're experiences that we've had in life. Maybe they're long-term experiences and you don't even realize what they are till you spend time thinking about it. Or maybe they're moments where an event happened and something radically shifted how you viewed the world. Maybe you were assaulted by someone or mistreated by a religious leader, or those kinds of things that shape the way you see things from that moment looking forward. We all have these distorted perspectives that are rooted in these unprocessed wounds, and out of those distortions come dysfunctional emotions. You know that moment that one thing happens and it seems like it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but on the emotional scale you go from a 2 to a 10 like that, and you just rip someone's head off? Like, where did that? I know you guys never have that, but I've heard of people who have those sorts of responses that seem disproportionate to the actual thing that's happening. And those actually come from these distortions that are rooted in these unprocessed wounds. And out of those dysfunctional emotions, we develop unhealthy or destructive lifestyle choices. And here's the thing. You don't have to live with those distortions. But you do have to be willing to let the Spirit of the living God show them to you so that you could see the world as it actually is, not as you're afraid that it may be. So Fresh Start is launching September 14th, 7 o'clock. Childcare is being provided for Paul Sliwa. I gave him for his birthday the opportunity to be the childcare for Fresh Start. Now, we'll have real childcare. And I would encourage you, because it is not just for those people. It's this process that you can enter into where you can discover where those unprocessed things are, what are the distortions they've created, and how is that connected to the way I'm actually living my life. And here's what I want you to know for certain. We all have these areas of brokenness, and you can be healed so that you could see things as they actually are. Over the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at the friendships that we have. We're going to be looking at the culture we find ourselves in. We're going to be looking at our religious experiences. We're going to be looking at pain and suffering, poverty and prosperity. And we're going to be asking the question, how have those experiences shaped the way that you and I see the world? In John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus says it in this way. There's a thief, and he's come for one purpose, and that is to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. That's his desire and design for you. In our language, Jesus has come that you could experience passion, purpose, and freedom in him in your everyday life. I'm going to invite you to stand with me. When we talk about exclusive truth claims, the world that we find ourselves in is really reiterating a common theme, a mantra that they're saying to you, and that is, don't be so arrogant as to claim that you know with certainty the truth. That's your truth. This is my truth. And it's irrelevant whether those claims contradict one another or not. We live in a world that tells you to shh. I've told the story before about a good friend of mine, Ben Fleet. Ben was a state champion heavyweight wrestler. He was the first kid in my youth group to actually beat me in a wrestling match, which is a humiliating experience, Paul Sleewall, but it's coming. I know it's coming for you. He was the first guy to beat me in a wrestling match. Now, Ben, fortunately for me, is he's like a farm boy. I mean, just the nicest guy you could ever imagine. He has me in some chokehold. He said, "This is the muffler," which I knew exactly why, because I sounded like, couldn't breathe. And Ben, all the other kids are gathered around, because that's when you wrestle, right? Ben has me in the muffler, and he whispers into my ear, "If you just push up, I'll act like you pushed me off." No! That's like just taking the knife and going, "I'll let you beat me." So he blacked me out, and I never wrestled another student again. Here's the thing. I tell the story about what if Ben, thinking he was so strong and so powerful, one day put on a Superman outfit, which would look terrible on a heavyweight wrestler, but put on a Superman outfit, had the cape and everything, and he's like, "I know for a fact I am Superman." He headed out to the highway. A Mack truck is coming down the highway, and Ben does this. I wanted to sing the Superman theme, but I always get mixed up with Indiana Jones. Dun, 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 dun. Oh, well. Like, if I loved Ben believes that he can stop the truck, but I know that Ben can't stop the truck. What's the loving thing to do? Ben, that's your truth. It's not my truth. No, if I loved Ben, if I knew something to be true, the most loving thing I could do would be declare that truth to him, whether he receives it or not. That would be the loving thing to do, not withhold it. In John chapter 14, Jesus says this, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God." Start there. "Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If this were not true, if it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also." Jesus should have paused this moment. Are you following the logical train of thought? I would have told you differently if this wasn't truth. And if I go to prepare a place, I'd like you to be there. So I'm going to come back so that you can be where I am. Are we all tracking here? "And you know the way to where I am going," which at this point, Thomas has a problem. Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How do we know the way?" I love this. Jesus doesn't necessarily rebuke Thomas. He just answers his reasonable question. Jesus said to him, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me." Now that's an exclusive truth claim. And here's what you need to understand. Jesus isn't making it out of arrogance. He isn't making it out of a need to be the one. Jesus isn't making it to be an ogre and to be cruel. He's making this statement because it is true. And either he's a lunatic or he is exactly who he claims that he is. But you can't have it both ways. Jesus is making this exclusive truth claim, one that excludes every other claim to eternal life, because of his deep affection and love for you. And the question that you and I are left with is this: will I continue to be my own God, or will I trust Jesus as the source of life and light forever? Jesus, as we lift our voices in worship, in a declaration of who you are, would you drive your truth deep into our hearts And would it be driven in by your compassion and your love and your desire to see each one in this room discover passion, purpose, and freedom in you and life eternal with you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.